Hello. Hello, everybody. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first Tech Talk of 2017. If you don't know me, I'm not Kieran Malooly. I'm Sarah Jane Martin. Unfortunately, Kieran couldn't come to the event tonight as he's reporting on the 6 o'clock news, so you'll just have to do it with me for the evening. I hope you've all enjoyed the barbecue and the lovely weather. We have a very interesting lineup for the talks tonight. Our first talk is with Laura McGuckin and Michael Behan. Both of them work in Ericsson. Laura is a technical manager in the area of 5G and provisioning, and Mike is the 5G architect. And tonight they're going to talk to you about 5G. So I'm going to hand over to Laura and Mike.
Hi everybody, thanks for joining us here this evening. As Sarah Jane said, I'm Laura McGuckin, this is Mike Biehn, and we are going to talk to you a little bit about 5G, what it is, what we in Ericsson globally are doing to make it happen, and the possibilities it brings us for connected things. Now that's a lot to try and cover in 20 minutes, so we can't get into huge detail, and we may need to talk really fast. Okay, so what is 5G? Well, what was 2G or 3G or 4G? What did they give you? 2G gave you voice on your mobile. 3G gave you kind of crappy internet on your mobile. 4G gave you fairly good internet on your mobile. And 5G is going to bring you even better internet, and it's going to introduce what we're calling the industrial internet, or the Internet of Things. So what is 5G? Very simply, it's the future communication standard. But to really kind of understand what it is, I think we need to understand what's driving the need for 5G. Why do we actually need it? So I'm going to give you a few facts and figures on that. There are 7.5 billion people on the planet today. There are also the same number of mobile subscriptions. That's 100% saturation. And actually, the latest Ericsson mobility report shows that at 101%. And the population of our planet grows by 200,000 people every day. We also have millions of machine-to-machine type devices in use today. These are machines communicating with other machines over the networks with no human interaction, what we're calling IoT, or Internet of Things type devices. So most of these are short-range, low-power things, your wearables like your Fitbits, your Amazon Echo, Google Home, Nest, even smart light bulbs. And more everyday things are becoming smart. And eventually, everything that could benefit from being connected will be connected. In 5 years' time, we're predicting there'll be 28 billion connected devices. Only 12 billion of these will be human interactive devices, things like your smartphone, your laptop, your tablet, anything with a screen. 16 billion of these will be these IoT type devices. So also by this time, we expect the volumes of data being sent over mobile networks to increase by a factor of over 1,000 to something like 70 exabytes of data in a single month. Now, I hadn't heard of an exabyte until very recently, about 2 weeks ago. But to give you some perspective on it, your mobile phone could probably store about 16 gigs of data. Now, it depends on the phone, but say about 16 gigs. 70 exabytes of data would be about 4.3 billion mobile phone worths of data. So that is the future we're looking at. Massive amounts of devices and colossal amounts of data. and a network that is now not just about serving the needs of people, but also things. So that kind of brings us to the 5G use cases. Are any of you familiar with them, or has anybody heard of them? Okay, so these are categories of activities that we think will be the dominant activities in 5G network. So basically, this is what we think 5G is actually going to be used for. So there's a number of these use cases or activities, and we split them into 3 categories. So the first category or class is enhanced mobile broadband. And this is mobile broadband anywhere. Sorry, just checking if that's me. Mobile broadband everywhere. So these are all the kind of activities you're familiar with today. On your smartphone, browsing, downloading movies, streaming Netflix, uploading content like Facebook Live, but better, faster, more reliable, and more energy efficient. And you might be thinking, I can do all those things right now. What's the difference with 5G? Well, in 5G, you can get broadband access in crowded areas, so at concerts or sporting events or festivals. So, for example, you could be at a match in a crowd of 80,000 people or 80,000 smartphones, and watching the match, but also able to watch replays of the last goal or the last foul on your phone with no issues. Or you could be in the middle of a festival streaming the gig live because you can't get close enough to the stage to see what's going on. With 5G as well, you'll be able to download 4K or 8K content in seconds with no Wi-Fi connection. You'll be able to stream or binge watch Narcos or Orange is the Next Black in 8K anywhere, anytime, with no more buffering. And live TV will be a totally new experience. It'll incorporate things like virtual and augmented reality and things like 360-degree cameras, so that you can feel like you're at the match without ever having to leave the comfort of your own home. So you'll never have to leave your smartphone or your smart home ever again. So all of these activities in this class are about, data volumes, about video. So the requirements that they put on the network is, for more bandwidth and extensive coverage. The second class of activities is called massive machine type communication. And machine type communication just means machines communicating to other machines. So that's massive machine type communication, or massive MTC. And this is where we see all the IoT possibilities that Brian and Jamie are going to be talking about later. The end of stuff is in the next class of use cases. So this is things like sensors everywhere. So we're talking like smart vehicles, smart transport, smart cities. Sensors embedded in vehicles, in roads, in railways, in airfields, enabling vehicles to communicate with each other and with the infrastructure, sending information in real time. It'll also be smart agriculture. And a really good example that Ken Finnegan gave on this last year was the Moo monitor. I don't know if any of you have heard this. It's brilliant. The Moo monitor, so that's a sensor that's attached to a cow. And it takes the cow's temperature, because apparently before a cow calves, its temperature goes up by 2 degrees. So that's good to know if you're a farmer. And an initiative that Ericsson has been involved in that I'm sure at least some of you will be interested in is wine. In Germany, Ericsson are involved in a trial to demonstrate how sensor data collected and processed from a vineyard can help the wine producers learn a lot more about their grapes and hopefully produce more nice wine. And we've actually partnered with an IoT startup on that. So the sensors take soil and air and solar measurements, and basically that information is all used and analysed. It's to show them what conditions create the best wine, smart wine. So the applications are like endless and the benefits are huge. And the requirements that these type of activities put in the network are, say, the requirements that they have are like low cost. I mean, there's a huge amount of these devices out there, so we need kind of low cost chips in these sensors. There's small amounts of data being sent in some cases, and periodically, but massive, massive numbers of these devices. But probably the most important requirement is low energy. So these devices are out there everywhere. They'll be in fields, they'll be embedded in roads, and they're running on batteries, and you are not going to be going out there changing those batteries. So the expectation is that they need a battery life of about 10 plus years. So what we need is for the network to leave those devices alone when they're not communicating with it. Because if you think of your mobile phone and how quickly the battery wastes, especially in low coverage areas, that's because your phone and the network are basically constantly playing a game of Marco Polo. Where are you? I'm here. Where are you? I'm here. So that wastes a battery. We can't have that for this sensor network. We need those batteries to last 10, 20, 30 years. The third class of activities is what we call mission critical machine type communication. So it's similar to the last class in that it's machines talking to other machines, but the activities here are critical. So this is where we'd have the self-driving car. And this will be what we call critical control of remote devices. And that can be anything from remote control of mining equipment all the way to remote surgery, where obviously a reliable connection is pretty vital, and the response times or the latency in the network needs to be minute, 1 millisecond. For the latency, if you think of the self-driving car, in a 4G network, it would take 4 feet for the brakes to be applied from the send brake command, 4 feet. In a 5G network, that would take 1 inch. So that's a fairly important few feet. And this might seem kind of out there, these kind of remote surgeries. That might seem like kind of very down in the future. The kind of Marty McFly flying car kind of thing. But I mean, we actually can see some of these today. You know, Ericsson have actually partnered with a mining company in Sweden, in Boliden, and we've installed a network down inside in the mines, which enables them to remotely control the mining equipment. Before they had this, after they blasted in the mines, they couldn't send anyone in there for a number of hours until all the dust and debris had settled. I mean, this is like saving them hugely in revenues. We also have a POC going on with South Korea Telecom and BMW with self-driving cars, which has had some interesting results, and we're going to hear about that in a minute. So all of these different types of activities drive extreme and fairly diverse requirements. You know, on one hand, you've got massive amounts of data. You need a lot of bandwidth. You need extensive coverage. Then you have millions and millions and billions of devices which need really, really long battery life, 10 plus years. Then you've got your critical activities that need those ultra, ultra reliable networks and the really, really low latency. So how are we going to satisfy all of those different requirements, and what technologies we're going to use? I'm going to let Mike talk to you a little bit about that.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, good evening. My name is Mike Biehn, and I'm currently working with 5G architecture. So our main job there is to ensure that the technologies that we're designing today will meet the expectations that we all want from 5G. So in Ericsson, we've been running a number of trials and tests for a couple of years now on 5G, and I want to talk to you about just one of those. It's one that we've been running in collaboration with 2 companies in South Korea, one South Korea Telecom and the other is BMW. So just a short distance from Incheon Airport, just outside the capital Seoul, BMW built their first driving centre in Asia about 3 or 4 years ago. And there you can go and you can make a booking, make an appointment to drive the latest M3 or Mini Cooper or whatever. They have restaurant and bar, and they even have a driving school for 5 to 7-year-olds. Don't ask me why. But why we chose that location is because it's also their first centre that has a racetrack built alongside it. So the main reason that we wanted to do that is we wanted to see how 5G radio would work with a moving vehicle, because it's extremely difficult to get a consistent, high-speed, reliable broadband connection when the mobile phone is travelling at a good speed. So we installed some of our new advanced antenna systems and some of the prototype base stations that we're building now. And then we took 2 of BMW's cars, nothing special, just an X5 and a 750L. We filled the boots with all the test and diagnostic equipment that we had, and we had 2 roof racks. I know, roof racks on a 750, with a big 5G antenna on it. Well, when I say big, it's about 1 foot tall and 6 inch square. So on the track itself, then there's a nice 800-meter long straight, and we deployed some of the antennas along there. And then we took the cars out and drove them around at speed. Now, before I go into how the results and how well the test went, I want to cover some of the innovations that were behind the test and the equipment that we were using, because these will define how and 5G will look like in the decade to come. So, in order to be able to get those extreme broadband speeds that most people will depend on in the future, we need to think about what's the key enabler for that. And the main contributor will be the spectrum. Now, you might ask kind of why is spectrum so critical? Well, when you think of, say, when you're driving, listening to the news or a match on the car radio, sometime back in the 60s, it was decided that, say, Radio 1 would sit around 90 megahertz and occupy a bandwidth of 200 kilohertz. And that 200 kilohertz bandwidth, that's what defines how much information can be sent from one place to another. If you jump forward, say, to the early 90s, when we started rolling out GSM, the second generation of digital mobile, we all going around with our Nokia 3310s. There, we had a carrier frequency of 900 megahertz, with 10 times that for the FM radio. And the bandwidth was 50 megahertz, so that's 250 times what we'd had for an FM. Then for 3G and 4G, the frequency and the bandwidths increased incrementally. So think back to 2012 when we were selling spectrum in Ireland to the various operators. We sold 470 megahertz of bandwidth for about 850 million euro. So really shows that spectrum is the new oil. So back to the racetrack. To get that wanted broadband speed, we're going to need a huge amount of bandwidth. So we had an 800 megahertz chunk of bandwidth to play with for the test, for just 2 cars. Now, you're not going to get that amount of bandwidth at the low frequencies that we use today, either for GSM or the other mobile networks. So for the test, we had to go to a much higher frequency, and we were running at 28 gigahertz. Now, in the future, after 2020, we'll be able to even go to higher frequencies all the way up to 100 gigahertz. So with that amount of bandwidth, we're able to get a gigabit broadband connection to each car reliably. So anybody in the back can be watching their 4 or 8K videos, and there's plenty of headroom to spare. Now, of course, when you go to those sorts of frequencies, one of the quirks of radio, of course, is the higher the frequency, the bigger the issue with getting distance. So anything at that sort of frequency, such as like the buildings, windows, leaves, rain and snow even, that would limit how far you can go. So one of the things you also can't do because of the IoT users in the network, you can't really up the power either. So you can't just send more wattage out to the antenna to try and beat the range problem. So the end result is that for now, the best solution we have is to deploy more and more base stations, more antennas everywhere. So that'll be most likely kind of in those urban downtown areas and maybe out to the suburbs. Out in the countryside, we will still use the large base stations running on lower frequencies, but we'll still be able to get a 50 megabit bandwidth connection to everybody who needs it. So with that bandwidth, we can get a consistent connection. With the high frequencies, kind of we're limited in range, so we'll have more base stations. But the coolest part that I think about the radio is the way that we're changing the antenna technology itself. And some of the things here were, when you consider how, say, a mobile base station broadcasts a signal today, it sends out a radio wave and it goes everywhere. And it's extremely wasteful. Most of that radio energy gets lost to space. It never hits a mobile phone. So what we will be able to do is, in our new antennas, we are going to have up to, or even more than 500 individual transmitters and receivers built into it. And what that allows us to do is we'll be able to send out a string of focused beams out to individual mobile phones. Now, one of the things about using those sorts of beam forming technology is that we need to change the perspective that the network has. So the mobile phone becomes more critical. We need to know where it is all the time. So wherever there is a phone, we can focus one or more beams to it, but if there's no phone there, we switch off the beams. So we're able to reduce the amount of power that's being used in the network. There is less interference, and we'll be able to connect more users doing that. The other thing is, excuse me, that we have to change how we control the radio network itself. So having lots of beams means that we've had to split how we, the software running the network. So part of it will stay on the base station, controlling beams, and a large part of it will move to the cloud. So using cloud technologies, we'll be able to get more scale, more bandwidth, and eventually more users through as well. So on the racetrack then, the cars were being driven around at about 170 kilometers an hour, just over 100 miles an hour. So when they were going closest to the base station, just about a 15-meter distance, they were going from beam to beam every 25 milliseconds. So that meant as it got to the edge of one beam, we would start transmitting on the next beam, and then again and again, until it got out of range 200 meters away, and then the next base station took over. How well did this all work? Well, throughout the test, we were able to deliver a consistent 3.5 gigabit connection to both of these cars, and that's the best success yet. The previous test by Samsung managed to do 2.5 gigabits, I think. So with the cars doing that, high-speed travel and the speed of the connections, where do we go next? Well, of course, this is only the start. These antennas are still new. There's still a lot more development work to go on. And we know that of the plans that companies like BMW have, they want to be able to connect more sensor data and to use technologies like vehicle-to-vehicle connections to be able to share and exchange information so that if an accident happens down the road, around the corner where you can't see, the car is alerted immediately and you can take action. And for that, you need a high-speed, reliable network. So we'll be working with more companies like BMW, South Korea Telecom. We'll be working with more smart cities and utility companies and others. And the technology will evolve, and hopefully someday we'll all be having a 5G phone.
Thanks, Mike. Just a very quick recap. So 5G is the next communication standard. We need it because of the explosion in data volumes and in connected devices. We're predicting its uses in enhanced mobile broadband, that's the media everywhere, in massive MTC, that's the smart cities and IoT, and in mission critical MTC, that's the self-driving cars. It has requirements of, say, 1 millisecond latency, 10 plus years battery life, and support 1,000 times the data volumes of today. And how are we going to do this? As Mike just said, new radio with new spectrum, way up past Radio 1 and Play FM. 2, the small cells, so as Mike said, loads and loads of base stations, disguised as lampposts and whatnot, nice little small ones. And that's to mitigate the issues we have with the new spectrum and its range. And then 3, massive MIMO, yes, and beamforming. So basically that's, 80 times the number of antennae we have now that can shoot beams of coverage directly to your phone and follow it all around the place. And then virtualization. So that is 5G, or at least the Cliff Notes version of it. Thank you, everybody. We have time for a few questions now, a couple. Great, there's one down there. Cathal. It's down there beside Jimmy.
Jimmy?
Yeah. This one's for you, Mike, I can feel it.
Hello. Yeah, a question. Mike mentions kind of in passing that 5G was for the places that needed it. Is 5G targeting mostly cities and concentration, or will the people living in the countryside still be left behind?
Well, it's important to remember here, I mean, we only started in Ireland rolling out LTE just a couple of years ago. And LTE Advanced and LTE Advanced Pro is in development now and is being released to market. So LTE is going to be around for many years to come. Now, because of the frequencies that LTE is using, we will be eventually refarming LTE coverage over to the next generation of 5G radio, NR, new radio. But LTE will be around for a long time to come. But 5G is specifically designed to work with multiple standards. So the new radio will also be able to cohabit and work with things like LTE and Wi-Fi and satellite broadcasting and other radio technologies. And eventually, through the digital dividend, kind of the frequencies that are being vacated by television, analog TV and other things, they're going to be used for NR. It was agreed at the last World Radio Conference in Geneva that the 600 to 700 megahertz band would be used for new radio.
So those range issues won't be a problem there. So.
We'll also, with the beamforming, the cell coverage is not the same as it is today. With the digital phased array antenna, you'll be able to focus the beam and actually squeeze out a longer distance radio beam than the normal cell coverage would typically allow.
Just one of the use cases I read about 5G was that it was going to target the fixed line, and I thought the business it was addressing was the people living in urban areas, or trying to support them with the lack of infrastructure in their homing.
Yep.
So,
do you want to talk about the Verizon trial?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have something that's basically to the last mile broadband. So instead of having to actually put cables right up to the houses, we're providing. We actually are doing a trial with Verizon on that. So it beams the last part of the signal straight home, last mile.
That's running at 28 gigahertz as well, the same as the trial in Korea. So we were carrying out tests in New Jersey in the last year or so that showed how effective it could be even when you're in a leafy suburb. No?
Yeah, as we mentioned that, we need more cells to be deployed, probably each on one lamppost. Will that consume more energy?
No, I mean, Mike mentioned that. I mean, like each generation we're using lower and lower power. So basically the answer to that is no.
Yeah, so with new radio, the effective radiated power to the mobile is going to be the same as what you have for LTE. But with beamforming, we can switch off most of the transmitters in a base station at any one time. It's only when there's a lot of demand for capacity and coverage that you would switch on all of the transmitters and receivers.
So Mike told you that in 4G in previous generations, it's broadcasted out. With 5G now, these are just concentrated beams, so you can just direct them straight at the user equipment or the phone. That's right there. And the beams are not turned on if there's nothing there to receive the signals.
Just a question about uplink. You're using the same frequencies as well?
Sorry?
On uplink? Because you're
Uplink.
talking about saving battery life on the devices. But if you're using 28 gigahertz on the uplink, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so the higher frequencies are really intended for the high bandwidth use cases, so the massive broadband, and possibly some of the critical MTC ones, like if you have security cameras. But most of the massive IoT, the low power devices, will be using the lower frequencies. So NR is supposed to be flexible in that regard, that you can use anything from 600 megahertz all the way up to 100 gigahertz. So whatever bands are needed for low power devices, they'll be available. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.